Hello and welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. I'm Rose. Last week, we talked about living with intention. Today, I'd like to build on that by talking about something most of us rarely think about: our habits. Shortly after recording last week's talk, I found myself doing something that I hadn't done in a long time. I was complaining. That day, I kept seeing more and more things to complain about. When I noticed what I was doing, I realized I had slipped back into an old habit. Then I realized that I have very little to complain about. Is it perfect over here? Not always, but I am truly blessed in many ways that complaining just seems wrong to me. Complaining never solved my problems. It kept my attention on what wasn't working. The more I complained, the harder it became to notice what I could actually do next. That moment reminded me of something important. Habits have a way of quietly slipping into our lives until we stop seeing them. And most of us never question our habits. We wake up, we reach for the coffee, we check our phones. Not because we made the decision to do that this morning, but because we've done those things so many times, they simply become part of our day. And that raises an interesting question. Am I choosing this, or am I simply repeating it? Habits themselves aren't good or bad. Some habits make our lives easier. They remove the need to think about the small things: brushing our teeth, putting on a seatbelt, taking a walk after dinner. These are habits that support our health and well being. Other habits quietly shape our attitudes, our relationships, and even the way we see ourselves. For example, if we have the habit of criticizing ourselves every time we make a mistake, we may begin to believe we are never enough. If we have the habit of avoiding difficult conversations, our relationships often become built around what is left unsaid. The interesting thing is that most habits don't begin because we consciously choose them. They begin because we repeat something often enough that it becomes familiar. At first, we make the choice. Eventually, that choice can begin making us. That's why habits deserve our attention. Not because every habit needs to change, but because every habit influences the direction of our lives. I want to share an observation that has changed the way I think about habits. Habits are usually the evidence. The deeper story is identity. Every habit tells a story about who we believe we need to be. If I believe I have to keep everyone happy, I may develop the habit of apologizing before I've done anything wrong. If I believe I have to carry everything on my own, asking for help may never even cross my mind. If I have the habit of comparing my life to everyone else's, I may stop noticing how much I already have and how much I've already grown. Notice that none of those habits appeared overnight. They were practiced, repeated, reinforced. And after enough repetition, they simply begin to feel like, this is who I am. Have you ever apologized before anyone suggested you had done anything wrong? I wonder what that habit had been practicing in you. Or have you ever said yes when every part of you wanted to say no? What belief about yourself does that habit reinforce? There is an important difference between who we are and what we have practiced. The habits we've repeated may describe our routines. They do not define our identity. That's why awareness is so powerful. The moment we notice a habit, we also discover something about ourselves. Not to criticize it and not to judge it, but to understand it. Because when we understand what a habit has been doing to us, we have the opportunity to choose whether we even want to keep practicing it. Notice your habits, and you'll begin to understand the woman you currently are. Then you can intentionally choose to become the woman you want to be. There was a season in my life when every day was full. There was always another project, another load of laundry, another idea, an errand, another thing I should accomplish. Looking back, I don't think I was simply keeping busy. I was avoiding. If I kept moving, I didn't have to stop long enough to feel everything that was still hurting. At the time, I didn't recognize that. I told myself I was productive, responsible, hardworking. I wasn't consciously choosing it anymore. I was simply repeating it. Keeping myself busy all the time also resulted in me being tired all the time. I had less patience than I wanted, and my relationships felt the strain. The work I cared about wasn't receiving my best. I felt like I was working incredibly hard and getting nowhere. And somewhere along the way, I became a comparison junkie. Everyone else's life looked easier than mine. And I thought I was managing my life. I didn't realize my habits were managing me. I lived that way for a long time. Until the day I realized I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally too. The life I wanted seemed no closer than it had been months before. Underneath all of that activity was a habit I had never questioned. I simply accepted that this was the way I lived. I never stopped to ask whether it was helping me create the life I wanted. I was simply repeating what had become familiar. That's when I realized that working harder wasn't the answer. I needed to understand what was driving the way I was living. So I began asking different questions. Not questions like, how do I stop being so busy? But questions like, what is this habit doing to me? What am I avoiding? What am I trying not to feel? And what kind of life is this habit helping me create? Those questions changed everything because they weren't really about my schedule. They were about understanding myself. Every habit tells a story about who we believe we need to be. Maybe you believe I need to stay busy, so rest feels uncomfortable. Maybe you believe I need to be strong, so you never have to ask for help. Maybe you believe I need to get everything right, so perfectionism keeps you from beginning. None of these habits mean these things are true. They simply tell us the story we've been practicing. You're not controlling. You have practiced being controlling. You are not a perfectionist. You practiced perfectionism. You are not someone who has to do everything alone. You practiced carrying life alone. I've learned that many of our habits begin for good reasons. They helped us survive, they protected us, they distract us, and they helped us cope when life was really hard. But the habits that protected us yesterday aren't always the habits that help us create a tomorrow. That is why awareness matters so much. Not so we can judge ourselves, so we can choose differently. Every choice is an opportunity to live more like the woman we truly are, instead of the woman our circumstances taught us to become. When we discover a habit we no longer want, our first instinct is usually to ask, how do I stop doing this? It seems like a reasonable question, but I don't think it's the most helpful one. Because when we rush to change a behavior without understanding it, we often miss the wisdom hidden underneath it. Most habits began for a reason. At some point, they solved a problem. They helped us feel safer, more accepted, prepared, more in control, or simply helped us get through a difficult time. That's why I don't believe our first response should be criticism. I believe it should be curiosity. Instead of asking, how do I stop? Try asking, what is this habit trying to accomplish for me? That is a very different question because now we're looking beneath the behavior. Perhaps staying busy was helping you avoid painful feelings. Perhaps perfectionism was helping you avoid criticism. Perhaps apologizing was helping you avoid conflict. Those habits weren't trying to make your life difficult. They were actually trying to help you. The problem is they did yesterday's job while you're trying to create tomorrow's life. Then you get to ask another question. When did I first learn this? Not so you can stay in the past. Ask it to understand where the habit began. This often helps us understand why it's been so difficult to let go. And then you get to ask, is this habit helping me become the woman I want to be today? Notice I didn't ask whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. I asked whether it's helping create the life you are intentionally choosing, because that's really the question. Some habits helped us survive, other habits help us thrive. Learning the difference is part of discovering who we are. So today, I'd like to leave you with one simple invitation. Notice one habit you repeated today without judging it, without trying to change it. Simply become curious and then ask yourself, is this habit helping create the life I want, or is it simply familiar? You don't have to change anything if you don't want to. You only need to notice, because you cannot choose what you have never noticed. Awareness is where every intentional change begins. The woman you want to become isn't created in one dramatic decision. She's revealed through thousands of ordinary choices. Every one of those choices can become a habit. Every habit casts the vote for the life you're creating. So notice your habits. They will tell you something about the woman you currently are. Then you can intentionally choose the woman you want to become. And that's enough for today. I'll see you next week.